back when I was a new PhD in 1970, I edited my first anthology. I don't even think Barbara knows about this. This is it, this worn out little red covered book called Women's Liberation in Literature. And it was published by Harcourt Brace. And I think it was the first textbook for feminist criticism that had ever been published. I got to do it. I was a new PhD. I was in my first assistant professorship job. And I felt a tremendous sense of responsibility doing this book to my projected readers. When I did it, putting together the list of texts that I wanted was really not very hard, especially because in those days I didn't even know of that many. But I got a real shock when I sat down to write to copyright holders for permission to reprint the author's work. I had wanted to include Sylvia Plath's celebrated poem, Daddy. You probably all know that poem. And I wanted to include two other poems by Plath. I was really going for broke. But when I wrote to Alwyn Hughes, who was Plath's executor and also the sister of her estranged husband, Ted Hughes, and who was rumored to be somewhat of a ferocious person, Alwyn responded that to reprint Daddy would cost me $100. Now, I was paying for the permission fees out of the pittance that I got for doing the book. And as a beginning assistant professor with two kids, I had not very much money of my own. And Alwyn said that the other two poems I had asked for were $50 each. That was the beginning of my literary career. And I will tell you that I settled for a $50 poem. I struck a bargain, and I bought a poem called Lesbos, which is really quite a long poem. It's a magnificent poem about enmity between two women, in spite of the title. It's a wonderful poem, which was a cheaper poem than Daddy for reasons that we can speculate about. Well, that was my introduction to the business of the literary anthology. And as an idealistic young scholar, it had never occurred to me that poems could be rated by their ticket price as well as by their quality. But that experience really changed my perceptions of literature forever. And from then on, I really understood, I think, that literature has always been a business, that poems, stories, essays, and novels are products in a marketplace as well as acts of the creative imagination, and that professional writers depend on their market value as well as their critical reception. In this new collection, I have two poems by Sylvia Plath, and I have to tell you, I still can't afford Daddy. And, you know, of course, in those days, $100, boy, that was an unbelievable bargain if it had been a stock. Now, I mean, of course, Daddy has escalated. So I still can't pay for it, and I've chosen two of Plath's other poems, very powerful poems written in the last few months before her suicide. And I realized that sometimes financial constraint forces you to look beyond the conventional and find something really wonderful. Not all the time, but in this case. So fast forward to the present. In 2003, I signed a contract with Knopf to write a jury of her peers, which has many women writers in it, but it's a literary history more than an anthology. And my editor at Knopf suggested to me that it would be a good idea to put together an anthology to go with it and to be published in paperback by Vintage. And that's the book I'm talking about today. It was an extremely welcome suggestion. I know that many of the works I talk about in Jury for Peers are out of print. They are very hard to find. And readers said to me, where can I get hold of these texts? How can I, now that I'm interested in them, or I'm curious about them, where can I read them? And I knew from the beginning that it was a given I could not possibly include all the important work by American women writers since 1650 in a single volume. That I knew from the start. On the other hand, before this, there has never been a single volume anthology of American women's writing from the beginning, which seemed to me kind of a staggering omission in the 21st century. And I knew that I wanted to make an anthology. I wanted to put together a book that was portable, that was economical, that wasn't weighted down by all of the apparatus of a textbook, that brought together stories and poems and essays by American women writers, as many as possible, that would reflect their diversity of subject and style, works that were beautiful or tragic or funny or satiric or inspiring or all of the above. And the anthology overall was intended to offer a kind of mini canon, a partial list, couldn't be a full list, but a partial list of who I think are the most significant women writers in the American literary tradition, and to provide a kind of map of their relation to each other and to American literature in general. So those are my aims. Now, all of us know, I think, that today the anthology is a genre very much dominated by a few large and wealthy publishers who can afford to hire the knowledgeable editors and researchers required to put a good book together, and who have the bottomless pockets to pay the staggering permissions fees for reprinting work in copyright. Most of the important and wide-ranging anthologies are aimed, of course, at the textbook market, mostly the college textbook market. They're multi-volume works of over 5,000 pages. They have vast budgets. They have vast sales. They have something of a student captive market, and we can talk about, there's been quite a discussion recently about the price of textbooks for college and university students. And over the past 15 years, they have been getting bigger. They have been getting more elaborate. They have been getting more expensive. They are packaged now with maps, pictures, teaching manuals, and in some cases, audio and video supplements. So you are buying really an entire experience when you buy one of these anthologies. Now, that's not what I was trying to do or what I have done. I wanted to put together a book for the general reader as well as the undergraduate, and to do it without the enormous committees and the consultations of the big texts. So I started out by making a list of all the works I would like to include in a utopian publishing world. And then, with the help of a grant from the Mellon Foundation, I was able, for a year, to pay 3 graduate assistants, 2 from Princeton and 1 from Harvard, to help me go through the libraries to see if there were works and writers I had overlooked. Vintage had established a rough guideline. I'm going to let you in on all of the, oops, there goes my earring. I was going to let you in on all of the statistics, financial statistics of putting an anthology together. Vintage had established a rough guideline of 800 pages. And they were willing to pay about $20,000 in permissions fees, which is probably about a tenth or less than what a big textbook publisher has available. This is huge business, the textbook anthology market. Now, those were my perimeters. 800 pages, $20,000. Copyright law, some of you may know, is different in every country. The guidelines in the United States that I was given by my publisher were to get permission for everything published after 1922. They figured that would cover everything. Canadian law is different, and I had to get some Canadian rights as well. British law is also very different, but no British publisher was willing to put up the money to produce an anthology of American women writers, and I think that's a shame. So that gives you a bit of the background. However, even with my realistic, even cynical view of the commercial and financial aspects of anthology publishing, and with the encouragement and backup from my very patient and endlessly optimistic editor at Vintage, Diana Secker-Tesdale, I was really unprepared for the nightmare of getting permissions. I cut my list to 100 writers, and I had to write for permission, copyright permissions, for 48 of them whose work was still under copyright protection. I started a year before the publication date, and the year that followed, a year ago in other words, was an education for me in Dickensian bureaucracy, greed, control freakery, inefficiency, outright lying, and the blindness of copyright holders to the circumstances of readership in the 21st century. I thought, naively, that many executors and copyright holders would be happy to have some long forgotten story or poem by a writer that nobody had talked about in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. I would come and say, I'm going to reprint this, and it's going to be called The Vintage Book of American Women. Isn't that wonderful? Not a bit of it.